Hi everyone, this is Dr. Bradley with a short video to wrap up our discussions on the Constitution. The ratification of the Constitution in 1789, the second Constitution, is seen by historians as the end of a long path towards federal union that began with the New England Confederation in 1642. You can see a schematic of this path towards federal union on page 188 in Chapter 9 of your textbook, where it traces the first attempt at colonial union with the New England Confederation in the 1640s and goes through the pre-revolutionary protest movements and the Continental Congresses, the Articles of Confederation, and the Federal Constitution. Individual states made constitutions first, starting in 1776, and the delegates who met in Philadelphia in 1787 learned a lot from the process of watching states make their state-level constitutions. There are two important areas of compromise in the Constitution and the body of the Constitution. The first is around representation in the House of Representatives, and it's called the Great Compromise. And it involves the combination of the small state or New Jersey plan and the large state or Virginia plan that led to New Jersey two senators per state, and the Virginia plan representatives in the House are allotted according to population in the states. And then the third part of that we studied in class is that as a sop to the Virginia plan folks who felt a little bit cheated by the other two, the New Jersey plan, that all bills that involved raising money would have to originate in the House. The second area of major compromise, of course, was around the issue of slavery, and there are two important parts here. The first is the 3/5 clause, which, as we discussed in class, was crazy on some levels, clause that said that, of course, slaves had no right to vote, and yet their persons would be counted as 3/5 of a person, and that number would be added to the white population in states that had slaves, boosting the population count of those states. And then the second slavery compromise was over the international slave trade, and in the Constitution it said that no action would be taken on this until 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution. Important is to the limiting the power of the different branches of government is that in the Constitution, Congress's powers and the President's powers are specifically listed. And so here in Article 1, Section 8, you can see the powers that are granted to Congress. They're very specific. There are 18 of them. And here in Article 2, Section 2, you see the powers of the President. Quite concise. Now, what's interesting in the history of the Constitution is that it also has built into it significant wiggle room. And the three areas that I want you to know are the elastic clause, the fact that the Constitution is short, and information about the judicial branch. The elastic clause is under congressional powers, Article 1, Section 8, number 18, and it says, Congress may make laws necessary for carrying out the enumerated powers, which, as we've discussed in class, can be interpreted narrowly or broadly, strictly or loosely. The fact that the Constitution itself is short, one of the shortest constitutions of democracies in the world, means that it's also open to adaptation, reinterpretation, and unfortunately misinterpretation as well. But the fact that it's short and open to reinterpretation means that it has stood the test of time. Another area of wiggle room was the judicial branch, which was left mostly undefined. Both as to structure, only the Supreme Court was specifically defined in the Constitution, and as far as powers of the Supreme Court, which would be defined in significant part later by Chief Justice John Marshall in decisions that he rendered between 1803 and 1836. I talked in class about how the framers of the Constitution were fearful of mobocracy, democracy by the mob. And I want you to remember the following things about how this was carried out. In two important ways, this was written into the Constitution. The first, as you all know, is that the President is actually elected indirectly via the Electoral College. And electors in the Electoral College are allowed to vote against the popular will. Secondly, is that until 1913, with the 17th Amendment, senators were elected indirectly via state legislatures. Other protections against mob rule were carried out by the states because in important ways powers were delegated to the states by the Constitution. So one of those is rules about voting rules about who can vote are left up to individual states. And until the 1830s, only white males who owned property could vote. In other words, about a quarter of the adult population. And then secondly, legal universal adult suffrage, i.e. all adults, was not achieved in most states until the passage of the 19th Amendment, the Women's Suffrage Amendment in 1920. And de facto suffrage, it's down here somewhere, actual universal adult suffrage was not achieved until the 1960s civil rights movement. So complete democracy as we take it for granted today was actually a long time coming. So I want to make a couple of vocab notes about voting. Suffrage means the right to vote, not the right to suffer. Many people don't know that. Giving someone the franchise means allowing them to vote. And enfranchisement is the act of getting or giving the right to vote. Once the Constitution had been written, then of course it had to be ratified by the states. And this led to a 2-year-long debate. And because the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention had been kept secret, the American population was surprised to find out that they'd come up with a whole new constitution. So a huge debate erupted between the Federalists, who were in favor of ratifying the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who were against it. The Federalists are famous for penning 85 essays, initially written anonymously, but later it revealed that they were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And these were 85 essays arguing for the Constitution. And then there was lots of debate over whether they were right or not. Ultimately, the Constitution was ratified, as you see in the summary table on page 193, with North Carolina and Rhode Island holding out the longest, and Virginia and New York championing the passage of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, providing protections for individual citizens and states vis-a-vis the federal government as part of their bargain for agreeing to ratify the Constitution. Was the Constitution revolutionary? It's the subject of the essay at the end of Chapter 9. You could look at it, or you could just discuss it with your friends and family. There are certainly arguments on both sides. Finally, in terms of amendments, I'd love you to know all 27, but as we discussed in class, I specifically would like you to understand the content of amendments 1 through 8 and 12 through 22. That's it for now. See you later. Bye.